In terms of the Ronin, if you were a member of the samurai class, being a Ronin was to have hit rock bottom. Or was it? You see, the term Ronin is actually a very, very unique one. It is one that is complex and carries with it a wide range of implications. Implications that not only existed around the times when the term was used, but also ones that have since arisen over the years and in retrospect. This way in which they are viewed can not only be seen through different lenses at different times throughout history, but also today as they have become a widely romanticized aspect of Japanese history. There is a lot we are going to get into and a lot we are going to try to conceptualize. I apologize if this gets confusing. I also want to point out that for some of you, what I'm about to cover in this video may be nothing new for you to hear. But for others, this may change how you view Ronin going forward. But the first thing we should obviously do is find the actual translation of the word. What does Ronin mean? Well, there's a couple of different ways Ronin can be written using kanji, but the most popular one goes contrary to what you might expect. The term does not outright translate to mean masterless samurai. Rather, it roughly means wandering or floating men, someone who is just merely drifting, perhaps aimlessly. What is interesting is that the term itself may not necessarily have to apply to just samurai, and could actually apply to anyone who has lost their way. Yet over the years, the term became very intertwined with the idea of a samurai who was no longer employed. A samurai without a master, and thus without a salary, turning to a life as a vagabond. And before we apply our modern romanticization to this idea, it is important to recognize how awful this concept might have been. Specifically, if you were a samurai of the peaceful Edo period, who lost your position and was thrust out into the world, it would have been a rough situation. You were essentially a member of the warrior class, living now in a world without war. In some extreme cases, this meant perhaps even being comparable to becoming broke and homeless today. To grasp the sheer depth of the potential suffering that becoming a Ronin could inflict upon not only a samurai, but also his family, you need only look at the story told in the film Harakiri, which beautifully puts on display the real pain of the situation many samurai found themselves in upon becoming a Ronin. But that is just one side of it, and that is also just one time frame. Being a Ronin could have taken many different paths depending on a wide variety of circumstances. Imagine, if you will, becoming a Ronin during the warring age of the Sengoku period. Say the clan you served was recently destroyed and now you found yourself without a lord to serve. However, during the Sengoku Jidai, the need for warriors was extremely high, and thus you could likely find more work relatively easily. In fact, there are plenty of famous samurai who went through this very situation. For example, figures such as Akechi Mitsuhide, Toro Takatora, and Okabe Motonobu. They all went through this experience, losing their lord but then quickly finding another. You can see how being a Ronin during a time of war was much more ideal for a samurai's career outlook. Indeed, one might even liken the idea of a Ronin during a time of war as being somewhat similar to that of a mercenary, yet the two concepts are still quite different. There is more to this, and I do plan to get into it in a little bit, but before we do that, there is another element to this whole situation that also contributes to the identity of Ronin being so complex. Now, let's return to our base idea of a Ronin as a masterless samurai. Being a masterless member of the samurai class might usually be viewed as perhaps being negative, as we've been programmed to usually assume that being masterless means one's lord was likely dead. Yet, as you may already know, this was not always the case. In fact, many samurai throughout history knowingly chose to become Ronin. This being caused by disagreement or dissatisfaction with one's lord. Thus, a samurai might consciously make the decision to leave the service of a lord they no longer care to serve, and in an ideal situation would likely leave to join another clan who maybe had already extended an open invitation. This was not something treated as dishonorable, except from maybe the clan that the samurai was deserting. We have to remember that loyalty, although virtuous, had to be maintained. I made a whole video about samurai loyalty, by the way. The idea that there was some honorable code like Bushido that all samurai followed has been proven to be largely a myth and modern-day concept. Rather, if a samurai did not want to serve a certain lord anymore for one reason or another, they might just straight up choose to leave and accept their fate as a ronin. Now, like I said, the ideal time for this to have happened would have been during times of war, when they could have easily found another position within an opposing clan, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen during times of peace either. Many samurai were very firm in their convictions, no matter where their beliefs might take them. Take for example the famous story of the 47 Ronin. They became masterless through no fault of their own, yet they still took it upon themselves to seek revenge, and through this, knowingly committed an action that they were all very well aware would result in their later deaths. Now, this gets us into an interesting debate regarding were they really being loyal or disloyal? Loyal to their past lord who had been put to death, or disloyal to the state for their rebellious actions. This debate is actually still ongoing to this day, and the shogun at the time was probably faced with this same dilemma. Yet I think he chose the best course of action that he perhaps could have, ordering all the ronin to be put to death, but also allowing them to die honorably through seppuku. You can see how he treaded a fine line. And this moves on to my next point. Ronin, although the lowest members of the samurai class, were still extremely influential. In fact, I'd argue that they might have been even more significant than many employed samurai. What do I mean by this? Well, Ronin sort of became a wild card in pre-modern Japan. They existed in a way outside of the typical role of the samurai, and unfortunately, many of them were often disgruntled. Here you have a large portion of the warrior class, many of whom perhaps wandering the countryside, many of whom perhaps turning to banditry or inciting insurrection to various levels. And what gets worse is of course that this number only rose as Japan's Warring States era drew to a close by the coming of the 1600s. Following the Battle of Sekigahara and the birth of the Tokugawa shogunate, many clans were being wiped completely off the map, which led to an influx of even more angry ronin. This becomes one of the largest contributing factors as to how Toyotomi Hideyori was able to amass such a threatening army by 1614, as so many ronin who had either been loyal to the previous Toyotomi regime or were hostile towards the Tokugawa were eager to join up in opposition to the shogunate. We are not talking about several hundred ronin, we are talking about tens of thousands. Some estimates even put the number of ronin who fought at Osaka as high as 100,000, which may have been around 1/4 of the entire population of all ronin in Japan at that time. Of course, a large number of ronin would have also joined up to support the Tokugawa and would later be rewarded, but all in all, the majority appear to have sided with the Toyotomi. And although the Tokugawa shogunate would of course win at the siege of Osaka and defeat this largely ronin army, this would not be the last time they would face such a significant ronin threat. We need only look at the Shimabara Rebellion, a Christian revolt in Kyushu that occurred in the late 1630s, where ronin once again played a large hostile role. Ronin continued to pose a threat to upend the established order of the otherwise peaceful Edo period,